Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reddest Beard Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Martin. This week I'm excited to share a story about one of the biggest changes I ever made in my life. The story is near and dear to my heart because it kind of set everything that I've experienced in the last 5 years in motion. What was this change? What was the impetus for it? Stick around, find out. In my opinion, one of the keys to telling a good story is leaving your audience on edge, thinking, no, that didn't really just happen. Did he just say that? Or that can't actually be true. And building up some suspense for whatever the next part of the story will be. That's what I think makes somebody like Quentin Tarantino such a great storyteller. In his movies, we often see snippets of the ending, and then he goes back to tell us how we got there. And it keeps the audience interested. It keeps people guessing what could have possibly happened to bring us there. So, in keeping with that tradition, I'd like to tell you a story about the time my friend Nick sat his shot glass down, looked me square in the eye and said, "Fuck it, let's move to China." It all started with a trip to Israel. In the summer of 2014, I had the chance to go to Israel for a month-long summer school English teaching project. It was run through some various Jewish agencies and charitable organizations, and what they wanted to do was take native English-speaking teachers to Israel to do a summer school workshop for low-income areas that didn't have access to native-speaking English teachers or the higher quality English education that some of the richer areas around Jerusalem or Tel Aviv had. So I found out about that. I volunteered for it. I put my name in the hat. I was chosen and I was sent. Now, I didn't know it at the time because I'd only been to Israel one time before, but Israeli students are on an entirely different level. And what I mean by that is Israeli kids are just extra. All that I knew about Israeli schools were that English was mandated. You have to start learning by like second or third grade. And that most Israelis I knew either spoke English very well because they had access to high quality education, or they could barely speak a lick of English. And it was like one way or the other. And we were going in hoping to find those ones that were in the system or in the part of the country that could barely speak a lick of English. I had dealt with some pretty high-strung students in the U.S. I had dealt with kids that, like me, had ADHD, were difficult to kind of instruct just because it was hard to keep their attention focused, right? But what I was not prepared for were kids that would just tell you no, or say, I don't want to, and just refuse to even, listen to you. Some of the things that, these kids would get into would be like fistfights in the middle of the classroom. Or I had a kid once who fashioned a shiv out of a lead pencil, like the graphite that you would put into a mechanical pencil. That little plastic pencil case with the retractable top, one of these kids fashioned a shiv out of it. And, God only knows what they were planning to do with it. But that type of experience was not altogether uncommon inside an Israeli classroom. If I called students up to the board, I considered it a good day if I could get them to get out of their chair and walk around their desk, as opposed to just hurtling over the desk, full force, like they were trying to win a race around an obstacle course. And that was just what the classroom was like. Israeli teachers sometimes yell, and it's not because they're screaming at the children just to scream at them. They have to yell to be heard over the bedlam. It can be absolute chaos, and it can devolve really, really quickly. And it kind of seemed like that was the inside joke for the Israelis that brought these American teachers over. They knew what it was like, and it was almost like they were going, yeah, we're just going to tell them that, like, all these cute Israeli kids are here to, like, learn, and they want to be here. And then once these teachers are here, we'll have, like, the breaking in period where they have to realize what classrooms can really be like. Now, I got really lucky in my first placement at the school that I was at, because the principal was a very kind of strict and refined man on the outside. Personally, he was a big goofball, and I just loved everything about him. I mean, he became a good friend of mine. But on the surface, in the school, he had this very strict manner. He had, like, a perfect crease in his khakis. His shirts were always pressed. He had the bearing of, like, a military commander. And so the kids wouldn't mess around when he was around. And there were times he would, like, sneak into the classroom when the kids weren't paying attention, like just sneak into the back. There would be a second door, a back door, and he would just walk in. And in the midst of, like, the chaos of, like, one kid punching another, a girl, like, biting the pigtails off of another girl, two kids deciding that their colored pencils should be projectiles and just screaming at each other, and me and my co-teacher about to lose our collective shit, where he would just walk in, and in Hebrew he would say, "How is everybody today?" And these kids with the fear of God would stop dead in their tracks and all just kind of freak out and go, "Oh my God, Yoni's here." And he would restore order just with his presence. Now, one of the tricks that I learned for these things was given to me by a friend of mine who had, like many Israelis, gone through the army. And she said, "Sean, they're all going to go into the army. Just treat them like it." And I went, "What?" She's like, "Just instill discipline." And so one day, I decided to teach the concept of left and right, teaching the directions, by taking the students outside after they had had a recess. And I said, we're all going to line up, and then we're going to walk around the playground. And when I say left, take a step with your left foot. And when I say right, take a step with your right foot. And these kids had no idea, but within minutes I had them marching as I was standing in the middle of them. And they were just marching around the playground in, like, a little circle, about 15 of them. And I was standing in the middle going, left, 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 right, left, as they marched around the playground. Then I decided to teach the concept of up and down by having them do push-ups. Basically, I worked them so hard after they had already had a recess and before lunch that they were too exhausted to go back inside and cause any mischief. And so they sat through the rest of my lesson. Now, I thought I was in so much trouble when the principal came walking by and saw me going up and all the kids pushing up, and then going down, and then all of the kids falling onto the ground. I thought, oh, this is it. I'm in so much trouble. Like, he just caught me running calisthenic drills with these 5th and 6th graders. And he just looked at me, that severe look on his face, looked me dead in the eye, and goes, "Sean, kol hakavod," which means well done, and then just kept walking into the school, right? So this is like the style of, and this wasn't a military school, mind you. This was a normal public school. This was just the style of what school culture for elementary school students in the periphery of Israel is. Other teachers would come back to the hotel we were staying in at night, exhausted, crying sometimes, just completely at their wits' end of what to do. And the only reason that I had figured some of this stuff out was because adult Israeli friends of mine had said, "Oh my God, you have to deal with kids in 4th and 5th grade." And because they had gone through the system and they were from those communities, they knew exactly what it was like. And so they told me, abandon everything that you would do in the US, because this is not the US. Our school culture is different. Here, children talk back to adults. There's none of this raise your hand and say, "Hi, Mr. Sean." These kids would come running up to me and just start blabbering in Hebrew faster than I could comprehend most days. And they would treat me like I was their best friend, right? They would just walk up and say stuff like "achi," like bro, or they'd say "takshif, Sean," which is like, hey, listen, Sean. When they're trying to explain to me why they wouldn't want to do the homework, right? So imagine having a fifth grader sidle up to you and be like, "takshif, achi, listen, bro, I just didn't want to do it last night," right? And you're the teacher who's supposed to be trying to control this nonsense and this mess. So this is what I was brought into. And within a week or two, I had kind of worked out the routine with my co-teacher and doing things like just running the children until they were too exhausted to fight me on learning something in a lesson. It worked. The school was happy with me. I was happy. I was relaxing. But I took the advice of the Israeli adults that I knew that said, this is how you have to approach it. Now, not everybody did that. And for various reasons, for different reasons, a lot of people took different approaches, and I completely understand why. But by the end of that first summer for me, I was like, okay, I know how this has to go. I know how this worked. I know what worked for me. I can come back and I can do it again. So 2015 comes around. I go back into that same school. I'm walking through with the program director and my new American co-teacher. She had been on the program before, but not in my school. And we go walking through the hallways, and one of the kids comes running down the hallway, screeches to a halt in front of me, looks up and goes, Sean Po, which is like, Sean's here. And then turns around and, like a rat on acid, runs off and starts sounding the alarm that Sean has returned. And the next thing you know, the hallway is flooded with these kids going, Sean, 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 you're back. And my co-teacher and the director looked at me and they said at that moment they saw on my face that I was just like, oh wow, this is great. I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I got to deal with a lot of the same kids again. So I had figured out a way to make it work. The thing was that a lot of the teachers that were in that program the second year didn't have that aha moment or didn't have that instruction from other people who weren't teachers. They were just normal members of society, workers, university students saying, oh my God, this is what it was like for you. I understand because I was one of those students. Here's how you should approach it. Right? They didn't have that outside influence. They were kind of trapped inside of this like teaching education bubble. Now, the second year that I was there, 2015, there were more teachers. A few of us had returned. So a lot of the new teachers kind of walked in with that little bit of like privileged American, well, this is how I run my classroom in whichever city they're from in the States. And so that's how it's going to go here. And most of the returning teachers were just like, good luck with that. And it's one of those things where you don't know until you know. And as much as somebody might give you advice or tell you what to do, you just have to learn for yourself. And so a lot of people had a lot of problems with their classes. And they would look at me and say, how do you control your class? And I'm like, I don't control my class. I funnel the chaos into whatever the lesson's going to be. And they would look at me like I was completely cracked. But as a student, I was terrible because I have ADHD. And I had wished that somebody had kind of funneled my chaos into a creative and productive manner. And that's what I was trying to do. Again, not because I came up with it, but because I took good advice from people who knew what they were talking about. Now, a few people took the advice that the returning teachers gave. One of the people who took this advice was my friend Nick. He showed up and he was like, wow, these kids are absolutely insane. I never expected to see a kid try to like karate kick another kid in the head and then just have half of the staff in the school go, hey, that was pretty good form, right? He didn't expect to see any of this stuff coming either. But him and my friend Adam, they listened to the advice that people like myself or my friend Olivia would give about how you just have to let go of what you think you know or what you think should happen in these classrooms. After a few weeks, we became thick as thieves, right? we'd get back to the hotel, we'd be enjoying our time, and we'd watch these poor schmucks walk in, pulling their hair out, going like, a band of 7-year-olds beat me today. And we're like, yeah, we know. We, we told you what to do, you just won't do it. Now, there were a couple of long-term residents in this hotel that was pretty well known in the area that we were staying in for being a short-term hotel for gentlemen and their ladies of the night. What that means is that you either had long-term business guys that were staying here for cheap because the rooms were cheap and so their companies could put them up for a week or two at a time while they were on a business trip, a random group of 50 American teachers, or a bunch of working girls and their johns. So this is the Hotel California that we had been assigned to live in. So some of the long-term business guys made friends with us, right? There were two drunk Scottish guys named Alan. We would hang out with these guys after our long day at work and their long day of work and just relax and kick it around the courtyard. And they would tell us stories of places that they'd been. They were in their 40s. They'd traveled around a lot for work. They'd traveled around before when they were in university. And I told them that I'd always wanted to travel more. Nick had already driven a car from London to Ulaanbaatar out of Mongolia. That was a crazy enough story in and of itself, right? But he'd traveled, suffice it to say, he traveled a lot more than I had. Eventually, the last night of the program came around. There was a big party thrown for all the teachers. The organization was throwing us a party basically like saying, surprise, you lived. So here's a lot of margaritas and some falafel. And so we're all hanging out there enjoying this, and the Scottish Allens are just typically drunk in the corner, and we're all having some fun talking about the shenanigans that had occurred, like when one of the hotel staff trying to seduce my friend Adam broke into his hotel room and was waiting for him on his bed when he came in, or when that same member of the hotel staff got drunk and was like, here guys, you want my car? You can drive off to Jerusalem tonight if you want to go pray at the Western Wall, to me and Nick. Right? These crazy things that were happening around this house of ill repute turned business hotel. And one of the guys walked up from our program, walked up and said, hey, does anybody know anyone that would be interested in moving to China for a year? The company I work for out in New York is opening a branch office in China, tutoring, preparing students to take the SAT and the ACT. And I was like, China, eh? Now, keep in mind, I didn't even know how to say hello in Chinese. I vaguely remembered that Big Bird went to China in a VHS tape that I had in my VHS cabinet in my living room at home, right? Knew nothing about China. Nick was like, absolutely not. The only time I've been to China, I accidentally drove across the border in Mongolia. Glad I got out with my life. And the Scottish Allens were just like, holy shit, why would you want to move to China? But the thing was, in those long conversations that I had been having with Nick and Adam and the Scottish Allens and my other friends, I had really kind of discovered about myself that I was unhappy back in the States. Now, nothing was going terribly wrong. It was just that slow buildup of nothing's going right. And I remember thinking I didn't really have anything to go back to. So I got this bug in my ear about moving to China. And I looked at Nick and I was like, we should do this. And he's like, absolutely not, I don't want to. And I was like, why? And at that point, one of the Scottish Allens leaned over and they go, didn't you give Nick a haircut? Like, wasn't he drunk the other night? And your friend Adam was drunk the other night? And you held up your cell phone to illuminate his head and you gave him a haircut? And I was like, yes, that's the one that happened to. And he goes, just keep pouring drinks and we'll help. So I started pouring drinks for everybody. And the Scottish Allens tagged in and were like, Nick, what do you really have to go back to? He's like, well, I have a gig lined up. And they're like, yeah, but doing what? And he's like, some travel writing, some, managing a website kind of stuff. And they're like, do you think that'll really make you happy? And they started to get under his skin. And even then, at that point, I was like, hey guys, I'm not sure I want to keep going with this. And they're like, shut up, Sean, you're committed, right? So I was pouring the drinks, and they were reminding us that we were young, in our 20s, not married, no kids, no long-term jobs. A lot of these other teachers had their full-time teaching career, and they were just volunteering to be here on their summer breaks. So they couldn't do it because they weren't going to leave their tenure track and their full contracts at their school districts to pick up and move to China. Basically, our friend that was running around recruiting got lucky because he found these two idiot nomads that would do anything. And part of me wonders if he went to the dude who received the drunken haircut and the guy that held up the cell phone to light the drunken haircut. I wonder if he knew what he was doing when he asked us. But the Scottish Allens, they worked their magic. And eventually, I was fully on board with this plan. I became convinced that there was nothing I could do that would make me happy except for move to China and start over on an entirely different track in my life. And eventually, 5 or 6 shots later, a lot of stories, and a whole lot of questions about, seriously, what is it you're going back to? What is it that you're holding on to so hard that you won't give this a chance? And Nick took a shot, set the glass on the table, looked me square in the eye and said, fuck it, let's move to China. 2 weeks later, I was in New York getting training from this company. A week after that, I was bound for Guiyang in Guizhou province. Nick was about 3 days behind me. And that's where the rest of my life started. Now, I don't know what the rest of my life would have held for me if we hadn't gone. I don't know what things would have been like if I'd gone back to the States and found a job there. I do know it wouldn't be anything like what I have now. That one conversation, that one party with a couple of old drunk Scotsmen and a guy that was willing to risk it all and change everything fundamentally altered the course of my life. And it was one of the best choices that I've ever made. All right, folks, that's all for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll be coming back to you weekly with new stories and updates, things that are going on with the website, stories that are being published. Head over to the reddestbeard.com now. Get on that mailing list. Find us on Facebook, Instagram. Give us a like. If you enjoy the stories, if you think somebody else that you know would enjoy it as well, go ahead, share it with them. Get people talking about their stories. Get people talking about the crazy, fun things that they've done in their life. Help them realize that their story matters. Until next time, this has been Tales from the Reddest Beard.